Good morning, Gymnasium. Our final week before we break up for our Easter vacation. What a series of weeks it's been on the distance learning plan. I'm really proud and impressed of everything that you've done to get us to this point. And then when we come back on the 27th of April, it is 5 weeks to go, and we can do this. I've seen the lessons, the quality of the learning, the reports, the feedback. Superb. Who'd have thought the year would have gone the way that it has? I hope you're all safe. Hope you're staying at home, of course, and taking care and making sure that in the home, under this isolation and this lockdown, we're all being considerate and looking after one another as well. Okay, we've got to balance a lot of emotion during this, and the most important thing is we continue our routines and our school as well. So this morning, I again wanted to choose a theme which makes us think a little bit more differently. And I thought, what better theme to choose than language? And the idea that we have 20 nationalities or so in our school as an international school. We have three main working languages, of course, Russian, Romanian, and English. And what I thought this morning is to take us through some thoughts about language and communication that we use and how we are in our multilingual school and in our globalized society as well. Well, let's deal with body language first. So I have, there's an old guy that lives opposite me that always puts his hand up and shouts "Bună dimineața" at me, or hello. I think he's worked out I'm English now. And people smile. You know that I've made this story known to you before, that somebody once said to me that nobody in Moldova smiles. Well, I think if you give a smile, you receive a smile back. And everybody's body language and communication is really important in the way that we use a different form of communication, which isn't just verbal. Rita Mae Brown said, language is the roadmap of a culture. It tells you where its people come from and where they are going. Now, we know, living in a country with two languages and a disputed history over linguistics, the importance of language. I come from a country whose language is the lingua franca, the language of the world. Everybody speaks English. And I'll come on to this point. But we also know that language is tied to culture. I will tell you that the Welsh writer, Dylan Thomas, famously said, if he wanted to think practically, he thought in English. But if he wanted to think in his romantic, sort of poetic way, then he would think in Welsh. You might be aware of the Bible story of all the people tried to build this Tower of Babel to get closer to God. Appropriate as we're talking about Easter. And God decided that in order to stop the people from building this tower to God, he would give them languages. So there's a nice irony here that languages actually means we are divided, not united. And actually, by having different languages, we can't then communicate and cooperate. And I think there's some truth, and if we look in history, how people have been divided in different languages and how people have not been able to communicate with one another because they don't understand each other, but there's always been a way to find a way of understanding. Now, here's an interesting idea about the types of language that we use. Now, I will do a spoiler alert before I even go any further. I'm not about to expose you to a whole range of bad language. We know that some nationalities, some languages have much stronger swear words, shall we say, or bad words than others. And I'll come back to Welsh. I think the worst thing you can say in Welsh, I think, is "kaita or," which is shut your mouth, which is nothing compared to some of the words that exist in different formats around the world. So bear with me. There you go. You can still see my technology skills are improving. I hope, I think. Okay, let's just watch this clip for a moment.
He's just showing us those because my father was evil and he wants to take over the world. head of a worldwide legal organization with aspirations of world domination. Well, pretty serious stuff. Where is he? He's like cryogenically frozen, orbiting on Earth or something. That's what you thought. Okay, let's bring out Scott's father, Dr. Evil. General, we've got a situation. What is it, Sergeant? Now, Scott. That is bad. How could you do this to me? On national television? We're throwing me a freaking baby here, Scott. Why'd you run out on me? Because you're not quite even enough. But it's true. You're quasi-evil. You're semi-evil. You're the margarine of evil. You're the Diet Coke of evil. Just one calorie, not evil enough. What is he, some kind of freak? It's okay. Okay, I'm all right. Okay. Get the jerk out of here.
I don't know if you've ever come across the Austin Power films before, but that was a parody. There is actually a show, Jerry Springer became very famous. He actually was a Democratic mayor of, I want to say, Milwaukee. It could be Cincinnati. And Jerry Springer, there was even an opera of Jerry Springer, but the language that was used in the Jerry Springer show and the way that people's lives were sort of always chaotic and always this violence, as well as this bad language, they became famous for the bleeping. And so Austin Powers and Dr. Evil there, who's sort of trying to reconcile with his son, that's a good example of just there's no communication in these kind of scenarios other than a use of bad words and a use of swear words. And people often feel that when people use bad words, it's more because of the limitations of their language. And the more educated we are, the richer we can choose language to express how we feel in a much more perhaps friendly way, or certainly a way that allows us to understand. So to have a second language is almost to possess a second soul. And most of us are finding now in this lockdown that the way that we are expressing these deeper emotions that we're perhaps having as we think more about our lives, that our expressions and the way that we can actually say what is happening to us. People are keeping diaries, I know, and journals, and I've seen some wonderful sort of online journals and some great podcasts as well, where people are finding the words to describe where they are and not the bad words. There are lots and lots of reasons why we learn languages, and I'm very proud of the fact that in our school we learn many languages. We learn Russian and Romanian and English and Spanish and Chinese, Mandarin, we learn German and French, all sorts of language learning. I greet you in Welsh, and this is why we learn languages in order. You saw that wonderful example last week of Christine Lupashaw, who gave the Founders Lecture in this beautiful fluent English, and the way that she'd able to navigate a global career through her language learning skills and acquisition. And I've made this point to you many times before in Moldova, that young people's skills that's going to give them social mobility in a globalized society of learning several languages, Russian, Romanian, English, those three alone, a Latin-based language, a Slavic-based language, a Germanic-based language, can access effectively so many different languages around the world by just having a knowledge base of those three alone. So if I go back to the UK, my wife was a very, very good language teacher and a French speaker and German, and a lot of our friends are too. And my daughter's also wanting to learn languages. But the UK has a real crisis because I guess everybody speaks English mentality. But in schools, what I witnessed before I came to Moldova was the virtual demise of so many language departments at universities and in schools, where French, German disappeared. Spanish made some sort of impact. Mandarin, there were some good schemes by the British Council. And as you know, the British Council, I do an advisory and ambassadorial schools role for and speak at many of their conferences and offer leadership and coaching support for them. But what the British Council have done for about 80 years now is promote the English language and English culture. And this was quite a serious report when we looked at the demise of languages in the UK. Now, you won't have ever come across this character, I'm sure. This is a comedy character by an actress called Catherine Tate. And this is Lauren. I just want to play you this sketch and give you some idea of the attitude that I'm talking about, perhaps, which was captured in this sketch towards languages in the UK.
Oui, Lauren, il faut que vous parlez en français. It's a French oral exam. You have to try to speak in French. Whatever. Laurent, s'il vous plaît, quel âge avez-vous?
I don't know. Ask me in English.
Lauren, it's a French oral test.
But I ain't a French oral. I'm an English oral. So if you want to ask me a question, ask me in English.
Lauren, French is an important language.
Not for me, eh?
It can teach you a lot about your own language. Lauren, you have to try to make an effort.
No, I don't.
It's a beautiful language.
Listen, you've got every kids. Are you scared to raise with me?
No, I'm not.
I don't expect to be French now. I don't know my head.
How dare
Miss, were you in Ireland? No. Miss, say good morning. Just say good morning. Go on, say good morning.
No, I'm not going to say that.
Please, Miss, just say good morning. Just say good morning.
Good morning.
You were in Ireland.
Right, Lauren, that's enough. I'm not going to stand here and listen to this kind of xenophobic abuse from a stupid girl who is too ignorant to learn the language, let alone understand the people. I will fail you for this test, which means you will get an F for the entire module.
Sweet above the head. Eskimo visage. Eskimo visage from head.
No, man.
Pass visions we part by date.
Lauren, your behavior is absolutely appalling. Do you behave like this at home?
Est-ce que vous disrespectez notre mère? Est-ce que vous appelez notre mère une pancake? Est-ce que vous appelez notre père un Jippo? Regardez, visage, Eskimo visage from head. Je suis pas mauvais. Regardez, visage, pas mauvais. Thierry Henry, c'est pas mauvais. Regardez mon visage, very sharp. Un kilo de pop, c'est pas mauvais. Regardez ça, c'est quasi initiative, c'est pas mauvais. C'est pas mauvais. Alors, roulez. C'est pas mauvais. Robert!
I'm proud to call myself French. Our nation has produced some of the finest examples of culture and enlightenment in European history. Our philosophers, our filmmakers, our artists have made a profound contribution to modern civilization. And you, young lady, if you were there to pay the slightest attention in my lessons, might benefit also.
Okay, that was Catherine Tate in a comedy sketch, as you get. The character, I've never met a student like Lauren, I'm glad to say. I'm sure they exist somewhere. I hope not. But the point is about the attitude perhaps some countries, unfortunately like the UK, have towards languages and why they're not learning languages. And I think the last point the teacher made there about the access you would get to philosophy, to literature, to art. And I said to you before, I think in an assembly on books, how my ambition is to finally read War and Peace, that wonderful sort of, opus magnus on the whole of the Napoleonic period in Russia. In Russian, that would be wonderful. ambition. So languages, as you can see, there's the map of Europe showing this huge diverse range of languages across the whole of Europe, and also where different languages kind of blur. You can see just in the corner where Welsh for there we go. Right in the corner on the western fringe is there, and in Brittany and in the Basque regions. We can see ourselves down here in Moldova, sandwiched between the Ukraine and Romanian and Russian and Gagaguzi, all sorts of different. And then the real sort of, even small micro languages like Frisian there as well. Languages give us this richness of our European heritage and our European culture. It's something we should be very proud of, the diversity and the range of languages that it's spoken and the nations and the culture it represents across our continent. It's quite unusual around the world to have such diversity and such wonderful differences in languages, from Finnish to Hungarian to Turkish to Spanish, Portuguese. Now, you will all recognize this flag, I hope, because in normal times when I'm standing outside of the school with a cup of tea and I'm greeting you in the mornings, goodness me, I miss those days. There you go, things that we miss. And saying hello, and I will say Bore da. This is the language, of course, of Wales, and this is the flag of Wales, the wonderful red dragon, and the green and white symbolizing the land of Wales. I have to say, guys, I'm being biased here, one of the coolest flags for any nation in the world. And Welsh is much, much older than English. I mean, depending on who you read, it's a couple of thousand years older as a Celtic language, and very different, as you can see there, between the English and the Welsh. Now, this is the Welsh national anthem. I'm not a Welsh speaker. I'm fascinated by Welsh, but my hen Vlad van Adai, this, the land of my fathers, is a very, very famous, stirring nation's anthem. I'm going to just play you a little bit here so you can hear it in its full glory. Let me just give you this a second. It's sung at rugby matches most famously, and football matches as well. And why the Welsh have a very poetic soul about them. They have special festivals called Eisteddfod, and they celebrate language and writing and poems and songs. And so when they play any sporting event, it's often this incredible moment of stirring the passions of the team before it starts. Let me just play you some now. Let's do this. That guy is. I recognise Gareth Bale there, the famous Real Madrid footballer and Welshman. So, still lovely to watch. This is Welsh people being proud of their identity, and it's not a nationalistic sort of horrible we're better than everybody else. It's just being proud of local identity. And I'll go back to the moment in October when we said goodbye to the English school from Chichester, and you guys sang. You sang to them as they left, and it was such a lovely moment. And I think that sort of celebration of who we are, our identity linked to the globalized world. And I think languages facilitate that. We don't want to see languages disappear. We don't want to see people lose their culture, their identity, their literature, who they are, because they can express themselves as the Welsh do through their languages. Now, interestingly enough, this is the seafront in a Welsh town called Aberystwyth, right on the coast. And I actually went to university here for my teacher training, a wonderful place, somewhere that I go all the time with my children. It's not far from my family in Cumberland. And we love the flags on the front here because there's a lovely international department in the university. I would certainly recommend Aberystwyth University to any of you. And what I love about the flags on the front, it's the flags of the nations of Europe that aren't countries. Now, I don't know, looking at some of those amazing flags, that you can guess who they are. I'm going to tell you who they are, and you can perhaps find out later from this presentation. So we've got Catalonia, we have Brittany, we have Wallonia, we have the Basque, we have Galicia, we have, I'm going to get this wrong, it's either Sardinia or Corsica, and we have the Frisian Islands. And there are many of these flags, Cornwall and Scotland and all these nations of Europe that are represented, because although they are not countries in their own right with in terms of members of the United Nations, or they have a proud sort of nation history there. So I'm not getting a special message through my earpiece. So as we know, there's all sorts of reasons why we learn languages. There are all sorts of reasons that languages increase our understanding. It understands the way we learn, our literacy skills. It makes us confident. It allows us to access a wider culture in the world. And I see that with the way that you guys are using English as your second or third language, the way that you can be a global citizen and a citizen of where you are from, the way that we saw with our speaker last week, that it allows you to access a globalized society for education and for jobs. And that's why we need to speak more languages, and languages are important, and not less language, and have a monoglot culture, which is where the UK has fallen into the trap, and the USA, of seeing English as this predominant cultural language around the world and the language of business. Now, I want to finish on a couple of things. So I love when these kind of things appear on social media, when people use language. So somebody in a college dorm, I'm guessing, do you slam your doors loudly late at night or early in the morning? You just might be a bad roommate. Do you leave annoying notes in the hall? You might just be self-righteous. I'm not advocating for 1 second that if you get bad service somewhere that you do this, but obviously they've decided to use the condiments to say we waited 30 minutes and no service, and communicate it. And then, of course, the cookies, their demise here. I want to finish this on something which I hope you'll enjoy, from, again, a British comedy show, looking at languages, of course, and whether people can express themselves in one language or another one. They're playing two sort of fish sellers from a market in London. They speak with a very strong, what we call a Cockney accent. If you've watched Mary Poppins, or Dick Van Dyke famously murdered the Cockney accent in the first film. He actually played a nice cameo in the second one that was done recently with Emily Blunt, which is worth watching if you're at home and you're looking for something for Easter as well. It's a nice family film. But the Cockney accent, they have a special language called rhyming slang. So, for example, apples and pears means stairs, to walk up the staircase. All sorts of lovely. But here they are now speaking about how they make a song, and he can't sing it, the one guy with a hat. So
no nonsense. Who's that girl running around with you? Oh, yeah. Who's that girl running around with you? No. Who's that girl running around with you? Who's that girl? Who's that? Biscuit. Bum 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 girl. Bum 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 girl. Bum 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 girl. Running around with you. Running around with you. Ding 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 ding. Running ding 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 around with you. You. Bing bang bong. You. Bing bang bong. You. Bing bang bong. You. Bing bang bong. Right, now put it all together. Bong 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 bang bong 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 girl, running ding 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 around with you, ding bang bong you, ding bang bong. Lots of things in the dots. No, you're right, Lance. You are tone deaf. English, though, not Italian. Ah, figaro bravissimo. Beverità. La 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 Do you know what, Lance? You're really weird.
That was Paul Whitehouse and Harry Enfield did a famous sketch show in the 90s in the UK, and I love those two characters. So some people can sing better in Italian than they can sing in English. So I want to finish. I asked Mrs. Elena if you've ever seen Mrs. Elena's artwork. It is remarkable. It's just an incredible. I just love what she does. I've got a painting of hers in my office of umbrellas, which she gave when I first arrived, and it reminds me of the rain of London. And so, as you know, I've been taking the idea of the Lighthouse, as somebody suggested to me a few weeks ago, that we were a lighthouse and a beacon of light for education and for you guys to know that we're still open and we're still doing the job and we're having our routines and our certainty and we're going to get through this crisis, and we are getting through this crisis. None of us have ever faced anything like this before, but we're here. And so I asked if she would do a sketch for me just to go into the bulletin in the banner. And there's a very, very famous Welsh phrase which is often shouted in rugby and football matches because it's a shout of defiance, especially that the language and the culture have survived. And it's called Imia o hyd. And it translates roughly as "we are still here." And I love the idea that we are still here, guys. And we're going to continue to still be here. And we're going to get through this, and then we're back into our physical school. And heritage is this sort of lighthouse, even in the lighthouse colours, and we're putting this light out into the darkness to make sure that we have our hope, and that you guys, I'm so proud of what you're doing, and that you've taken to this sort of completely new way of learning, and this whole school being online. But Imia o hyd, in any language, we are still here. And I love hope, speranza, nadiezhda. So, as Wittgenstein said, the limits of your language are the limits of your world. And I think as young people in the sort of throes of a wonderful school and education and the opportunities that lie ahead of you and where that will take you, as we saw with our speaker last week, the limits of your language are going to be the limits of your world, especially in a globalized society, and especially in a society where our identity and who we are, how we communicate, how we access, how we travel, how we go to university, how we get our jobs, how we find our happiness, all those things are important. And it all comes down to language, how we express ourselves, our second soul inside. And no bad words, please. We can do better than that. Have a great day, guys. Thank you for listening. And when it arrives, and yes, we're all inside, but let's have a nice Easter vacation as well. Lots of ideas for you guys to do. Thank you so much. Guys, I'm so proud of you all, okay? Diolch yn fawr.